Good morning. Welcome to the Friday Grief Chat with Jill and Deb, except I'm Jill and that's not Deb. However, let's see if I can get this pointer right. There we go. That is what we're going to talk about. And no, it's not a lecture, I promise. But, sometimes there are things we need to talk about that require a little bit of word stuff. And for me, because I have a brain injury from long ago, I need words to be able to see what I'm talking about. If you've ever seen me in person at a conference, you will see that I don't do the slides where it's a pretty field of grass. And now I'm just going to talk to you about the subject. That is not me, because I need the words to say, we're going to talk about moral injury today, in addition to everything else, because moral injury totally applies to the world we are in right now and to the situations many people are facing right now. And to be honest, because I'm getting ready to present at the VA to their chaplain program with a retired chaplain that works with us at our Project Food program. And as we were prepping for that this week, we talked more about moral injury. And I thought, this is something we need to give our viewers, our participants, the ability to have the words for and to talk about. So I hope that if you're watching this afterward, you can look at this and take the information and utilize it when you need to. I also teach a class for Marian University in their thanatology program in the summertime for first responders grief, and moral injury is a huge part of that. But moral injury is something that lots of people face, and it's something that comes up in research mostly for the military and now more for law enforcement. But in practicality is something that is part of the life of lots of people, no matter what walk of life they're in, because it occurs when there's a traumatic event. And you can describe and define traumatic event any way you want, in which your deeply held morals or values are violated. Now, that's got lots of space right now here in the United States. That can include, a current war we might be in, or wars or conflicts or whatever somebody is defining them as. In my world right now, it comes into play because I have a loved one in North Carolina who matters very much to me and is currently transitioning from this world to go home to my late wife, Casper, and her sisters and his family after a brain tumor. And the brain tumor was not discovered because socioeconomics spoke louder than pain and expressed symptoms and expressed needs. And because there was no funding to say, I can go someplace else and get this done. I have another family member who is definitely battling a horrific illness right now and terrible pain. And they are in a place where they are being forced to pay cash for some testing. But for them, the good news is they have that ability. It's going to stretch them, but it's available. Whereas my loved one in North Carolina, not so much. There was no extra to demand extra testing. There was not even food available because there was an assumption there was a choice not to work, when in fact there was an inability to work. But because it's a state that believes very strongly in making those who have needs and are low income into takers, and that's a quote, air quote from me, not as true victims of a system that favors the wealthy, then there was no ability for him to get what he needed. And I am going to struggle with this one for a long time. I've had some discussions with the senators in that state, with their offices. I've experienced some gaslighting from them, telling me that their system works when clearly it doesn't. And the Social Security system, which decided not to ever decide there was disability. And my loved one there is probably not going to see Monday. We were born in the same year. We celebrated changing ages every year, and he won't see the next year that we're claiming in the next few months. And it just stinks. And that is a moral injury, because a brain injury is definitely a traumatic event when it's diagnosed. Multiple illnesses become traumatic events. Not having the basics, including food for one's beloved kitties, is a traumatic event. And yes, trust me, those things were taken care of. But sometimes there's a matter of pride for people who are facing illness and do not want to have to ask, which is also, for me, kind of a moral injury, because we should be about taking care of each other, and we should be able to take care of each other, and we should be able to say, I have a need. Can someone help me? We do it on GoFundMe all the darn time. But on GoFundMe, there has to be some disclosure publicly of everything, and pictures and updates. And not everybody is built for that kind of thing. I wish they were. I wish we could just ask. I wish more. We had a system that said, okay, you're disabled. Let us help you. Oh, you have health insurance. We should pay for testing, without you having to beg or get the words just right. We have symptoms. We need to do a test. And we don't. And that is a moral injury, because my deeply held belief is that people who are sick need to be taken care of. That is one of the deepest held beliefs I have. And people who are dying deserve to have dignity, and hospice, and pain meds, and visits at home on a schedule that makes sense. And you better believe, when I heard about the multiple fake hospices in LA, that I lost my teeth, my eyeballs, and some brain cells, getting angry about that, because that behavior then reduces access to real hospices, to real patients in the same area, because it's easy to start accusations for those who don't value access to healthcare in the way that I do as a social worker and a medical social worker and a human being, right? And Stephen says, as you know, we're constantly fighting with social and government services, to get adequate care for Harrell. They absolutely had to fight for that. And so that is a moral injury. And moral injury can cause distress, which can lead to PTSD and depression and anxiety disorders. It makes you feel angry and betrayed. And this comes out in veterans, in being told to do things that they don't think they should be doing. And in this country now, we have big giant billboards up telling folks that they don't have to respond to deployment if they think it's an illegal deployment. And we have veterans and active duty who are military who are trying to sort that out. When I did a speaking engagement with folks who were active duty in the Navy around the world several years ago during the COVID lockdowns, moral injury was one of the hallmark themes, and it circulated around inherent racism, both in the military and in the country, because they were also seeing George Floyd from ships. And you're in an encapsulated world there. And people with other beliefs felt free to say so. And that caused others to take it inside. And there was PTSD developing. And there were folks who couldn't go to their new duty stations and see their family members and get promotions. They got passed over because they couldn't physically dock in a port because the COVID levels were too high. So there was that too. So moral injury is something that creates a sense of betrayal, a sense of I can't believe you're doing this to me. A sense of this isn't my healthcare, my country, my police department, my fire department, my federal agency. I have a loved one who is part of the deployment system for disasters in this country. And there are changes being made there that are not terrific for people in the country facing disasters, as we saw in North Carolina last year when things were delayed, as we saw in other areas of this country more recently where things got delayed because there was somebody running the shop who didn't understand how to run the shop and didn't put the needs of those they were supposed to be serving before her need to pose and have her hair blown out. Obviously, I don't worry about hair being blown out. Yeah, there you go. This is a hair blowout for Jill. Wet hair, toss. So moral injury is a very big deal. And when it's traumatic, it usually creates really stressful moments for folks, and it makes them feel like they don't fit anymore, like they don't have leadership that cares about them anymore, that they don't have people who were friends and were equals who've moved into leadership who no longer see them at the same level or respect them at the same level. It gives a sense of, I'm watching you do things that is hurting people, that is hurting me. You are hurting me. You are hurting my family. You're hurting my loved ones with your lack of care. And it occurs when a police officer is not supported by his or her department. It occurs when someone retires out of a fire department and is no longer considered relevant enough to even invite to the get-together at the firehouse, right? There's all kinds of places that these moral injuries occur. And for me, more locally, because I'm obviously not on the world stage, it occurs when I see a loved one who is suffering and I call someone who's up here and making legislative decisions, whether at the state or the federal level, and they don't care, and they gaslight, and they do the things that we want them not to do. We want them to hear, you're hurting people. I know you don't want to believe you're hurting people, but dude, you're hurting people. When you are voting for these policies, you're hurting people. When you are laying off half of Social Security staff, you're hurting people. You're literally hurting people. When you're saying folks have to go online to handle stuff, and it's stuff that's largely for seniors, first of all, I know you've lost your mind. Secondly, I know you've never had poor internet access, which probably half the country does. And third, I know you don't know that some people don't have secretaries and clerks and techs at their disposal to just say, go and do, right? There was a judge in Texas who got nailed because a tech came to fix his internet and the judge was just plain rude to him. And it was live on a national news feed and it went viral. Not everyone has that person to come and help them, much less to be rude to them. That, as far as I'm concerned, was a moral injury too. That judge owed that man a thank you, not a rude comment. Just because the tech pointed out the problem was, in fact, the judge and his unwillingness to listen to what he was being told every morning about how to start his computer. But, Sandra says, my nephew died Wednesday. I'm so sorry, Sandra, after being kicked off his disability benefits. And he's being buried today by her sister. My heart goes out to you. I know that comes from everyone else here too. And yeah, when we lose benefits, which people are in this country nationwide, then we lose Medicare, we lose Medicaid or Medi-Cal, depending on where you are. We lose food stamps. We lose in-home care services. In California, we have something called IHSS, that if you qualify for our version of Medicaid, which is Medi-Cal, then you're qualified for IHSS, and that will pay someone, and you choose the caregiver. It can be a family member to take care of you. And it keeps people home and safe and fed and all those things. So when you move them out of the ability to access one program, it levels everything out. We have people who come to our program on Wednesday nights at First Congregational Church in Riverside. We work at Project Food, and we have the Riverside Free Medical Clinic every other Wednesday, run by UCR students. My team is there. My team of social work students and mental health students are there to provide mental health support. We have folks who show up who've just been discharged from the hospital. We've had folks show up in hospital gowns with a jacket thrown over them, with a prescription for a high dose medication that they don't dare safely fill because someone's going to steal it from them while they're living on the street in a hospital gown because they have no place to go. That, oh, talk about a moral injury. Talk about a Jill moment. Talk about Jill calling 911 and sending them back to the hospital and calling the hospital social worker and reminding them that there's a law that says you can't do that and you better find them a placement because otherwise we're going to be talking to the state of California in the morning. So that is a moral injury. So in order for moral injury to occur, the individual who's experiencing it has to have some deeply held values, and they need to have them challenged, and they need to have them treated as if they weren't important, which is depersonalizing and adds to the trauma they are experiencing. And we have research about it, but most of the research is about the military, some of it about law enforcement of various types. I think after this administration is over, we need to have the NIH do a deep dive on the effect of moral injury on most people in this country, because we're also seeing people who we thought were friends and who we thought were supportive neighbors who are in fact celebrating these kinds of losses, including the loss that Sandra just experienced and the loss that's occurring in my family in North Carolina right now. And if in this tiny little program, we can have 2 people experiencing a death or an upcoming death because of these policies, then just imagine what it really means for those around the entire country, what it means for those who are facing orders right now from the military to deploy, what it means for those who are being told to stop protests, what it means for those who are protesting and are seeing violence. The VA lost one of their nurses because of this. And I wanted to bring this up today because not only was I prepping to talk to the chaplains about grief, and this is part of grief, especially when you're working for veterans and with veterans, and many chaplains at the VA, in fact, are veterans and have experienced combat, but it also impacts those that I see on Wednesday nights, those I see in my office and on screen. It's impacting family members of mine. It's impacting Stephen because he's probably got some significant feelings. I'm not disclosing things for you, Steve, about what it's like to experience a loss and have the government that created the illness itself not acknowledge that they did so for so many years. Because those who faced combat and even non-combat roles during the Vietnam era and the Korean War era were exposed to chemicals that are, well, they're no longer legal, but I'm not entirely sure with this administration that we're not using things that are not entirely legal anymore. But those chemicals are forever chemicals, and they did forever damage. We lost a member of our church to glioblastoma, which is a disease that she developed having served on a military base in Germany during that era. And she was exposed to stuff coming back from secret trips to Laos that we didn't acknowledge. Thank you, Richard Nixon. And so we've got lots of places that these moral injuries have popped up and continue to pop up, because although that church member has died, because you can't survive a glioblastoma, her family is still experiencing that loss, because we know when someone dies, their memory stays with us. And if their memory includes a traumatic death, which glioblastoma absolutely is, which ALS absolutely is. ALS is another disease that is tied now to Agent Orange. And so is spina bifida. I have a friend who is a therapist who has spina bifida because his dad served during that era. And those chemicals were transmitted to the friend as a developing fetus because his mom lived with his dad, and dad had the chemicals on his person. And nobody had any way of knowing. That is a moral injury because your government used this terrible chemical, which we knew did terrible things at the time to the people it was being dropped on, but now it's become a long-lasting part of so many lives. And there hasn't been a huge shout out to veterans and their families to say, if you have an Agent Orange injury, these are the things that did it. They post little things, but they're not super aggressive with saying you need to file. So I'm going to say you need to file. You need to tell the government your family was in fact a victim of Agent Orange. And I don't use the V word very often, but it is a V word moment, right? It's the injury of knowing that there are supposed to be insurance companies taking care of us, and the fact that Luigi Mangione, and I'm not advocating murdering anyone, hear me clearly. I don't think murder is the answer to anything. I don't. I'm not going to say it. But his apparent level of acute response to what the actions were by a major insurance company have reverberated for the victim's family tremendously. And yes, there are victims to that, but there are also victims of that insurance company who can't get care and who are being denied care because of AI or a computer program, or because they just frankly know that in the case of another insurance company, if they tell senior citizens enough times, no, you can't have that test, you're not qualified, it'll cost too much, eventually that particular group is going to back down. They know that they can wear them down either by age or because they just say no enough times that people will feel denied and dehumanized enough, they'll stop fighting. And we know that because of some very creative researchers who found the words printed in emails. So it is a nationwide problem here in this country. Moral injury applies to those who are facing conflict on both sides in the Middle East. And I'm going to tread carefully here because I have very strong feelings about both sides and for both sides in that conflict. And most of all, I really hate seeing bombs dropping. And I hate seeing bombs dropping because they injure and kill people, and because they also take dollars away that could be used for helping people instead. You know that old t-shirt that says war is not healthy for living creatures and children? Yeah, that's me. That's my poster. That's my shirt. that is who I am. It's not healthy. Doesn't help anybody. There are a few wars we've absolutely had to do because the person starting the first war was absolutely not in his right mind, and World War I and World War II were that. The rest of them, there's a lot of room for debate, and this is not the program for that. But the impact of those wars, this program is that place, because when we have war, we have loss. And we are all about the loss. And we also need to find a place in the middle of facing moral injury to find some humor and to find some grace. And for Sandra, the grace is, I hope that your nephew had a peaceful passing. I hope that your sister is finding support and that her loved ones are surrounding her, and that he was able to have the time to say goodbye and to determine what his legacy would be. I am very much hoping that my loved one in North Carolina has had time to say the things. He actually called me and we had that conversation just a few days ago. And we said the things, and I'm not going to share what they were other than to say I told him thank you for all that he'd been in our family, and that I was glad his cat had found a new home, because that was his greatest fear. He wasn't afraid of dying. He was afraid of his cats being abandoned, because he had put everything he had into them. Literally, he would go without eating for a day in order to feed his kitties, until some of us found out about it and made sure everybody got food. But that was the kind of person he was. And he helped take care of my second wife up until her death. We were there together when she died. So this is that person dying. And yet we have to find humor. So I will share that while I was writing the eulogy for my second wife, my loved one who's dying now was dressing up in drag and dancing around the room with a cocktail and doing the hula because of our love of Hawaii, and was able to bring some light and bring some joy and bring some humor into those hours right after the loss of his sister and my wife. And that is what humor, grace, and grief is all about, right? It's being able to find the grace to continue to fight like Stephen has, to fight the military machine, to get them to recognize what they're doing to people, and to make sure that veterans get what they deserve, because they do have the right to the support that they have earned by being willing to show up and put on that uniform and to serve their country. It is another friend of mine who has not been well served by VA Med in some of the decisions they've made, and yet has been well served in the fact that they step up every time she walks in the door and they meet the needs that are being presented. And, if she showed up on my doorstep, I would do that too, because she is a mighty warrior. But she served her country, and she deserves every bit of the respect and the dignity and the care that they must provide for her. I want us to, this weekend, remember those who are serving, because there are people getting letters saying, if you're on reserve, get ready for deployment, but don't tell anyone. And so if you know someone who's in the reserve, reach out and tell them you're thinking about them. Don't ask, because they're not likely allowed to tell. If someone is deployed, take care of their family. If someone is in the middle of loss, get those funeral potatoes ready. Sandra, if you were nearby, there would be potatoes coming. Our women's club is going to be doing a memorial service tomorrow for a longtime member who died very suddenly last month. and her family will be surrounded by the women's club that she was a part of Saturday afternoon. We need to hold those up with grace who have had a loss. We need to remember the fun that they were. We need to provide some humor for those facing loss and for those who are in the middle of getting ready to go, even if they don't think it's a great idea. For those who are facing illness and pain and all of that right now, I got to tell you, I'm seeing a kid right now whose favorite show is The Golden Girls. And I just love that because even though it's dated and some of the humor is dated, you can still laugh out loud. And laughing out loud resets our brains. And we need that more than ever. We need that. And if you've got someone in your world who is facing an injury that includes moral injury, please do ask them what would be helpful from you to support them in this experience. I've included the email at the website for the article that the VA put out about this that has not yet been taken down. I'm not sure that it won't be, but it's up still. It's ptsd.va.gov/professional/treat, all the things. I think if you go to the VA website and put in moral injury, you'll still find it just as easily. You'll find it also in the notes, or if you replay this, and you can grab that down. From my heart to yours, to Deb, on your way to Chicago, please be careful. I will never drive into Chicago again from the outskirts. I don't know who's doing it for her, but that is not a trip I will ever do again. I will pay everything I have to fly directly into La Crosse rather than drive from Chicago. Oh my goodness. Everyone, like Steve, wishing you a safe and beautiful weekend. And I will be on my way to the river on Sunday to watch the Colorado River trickle down and reset my brain listening to the water sounds and watching the ducks and the burros and all of the things, all the goats on Goat Island. Talk to you later, everybody. See you next week. Bye-bye.